Hi everyone, this is my seminar topic from physiology, that is temperature regulating mechanism, and also covers the topic of role of hypothalamus, thyroid and adrenal glands in the mechanism of temperature regulation. So let's see what is this. So what does a thermoregulation means? What does it process means? So thermo means heat. We all know that thermo means heat. Heat regulation or thermoregulation, it is a mechanism by which mammals maintain their body temperature with tightly controlled self-regulation independent of its external temperatures. That means most of the mammals, not all, most of the mammals like human beings also, they are control their internal normal core temperature with independent of their external temperatures. Okay, it is a type of homeostasis. That is the main function or the first function of thermoregulation is to maintain the internal homeostasis by preserving stable internal temperature in order to survive, and it is crucial for human life. So without thermoregulation, what will be happened? We know that the all metabolic process needs they may be exothermic or maybe endothermic, that is maybe they release heat when the reactions is done, or maybe they take the heat to uh, or for the reactions. So if the temperature is not regulated internally, then the human body would cease to function. Thermoregulation, it is uh, also plays an adaptive role in body's response to infectious pathogens. So the main function or the first function is to maintain internal homeostasis, then second function is to prevent invading pathogens like infectious pathogens. Okay, so human beings have a normal core internal temperature around 37 degrees Celsius, that is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the optimal temperature, or it is the equilibrium temperature at which human body system functions. All metabolic process is done uh, by or this between this range of internal temperature, that is 37 degrees Celsius. So this temperature is always maintained by four maintaining mechanisms. That is, first one is vaporization, radiation, second one is radiation, third convection, and the conduction process also. These four mechanisms have brought to maintain, or it will maintain this our human body temperature at only at 37 degrees Celsius. Humans and other mammals and birds are endotherms, which means endotherm means they can regulate their internal temperature with independent of their external temperature. So what about other animals? They are exotherms, that is they cannot maintain their internal body temperature, but uh, they use somewhat mechanisms to survive in this conditions, maybe too cold or too hot conditions. They are survived by special adaptive mechanisms. Okay, that is we heard about estivation, that is summer sleep and winter sleep, that have taken by the animals like frogs. They take this mechanisms to survive extreme uh, thermal conditions, like maybe they too cold or too hot conditions. So humans and other mammals are endotherms. They can they can regulate their thermal or heat production or heat release to maintain their body temperature. There are three main ways by which human temperature is affected, and in response they regulate it. That is, the first when the first mechanism or the first stage is to exposure to the changing climate. Maybe it's the weather is cold or hot. When we exposed to its climate, this like climate, we have a lot of what to call we have a lot of responses, like maybe we behaviorally response, or maybe we our central nervous system and our nervous system function to maintain this also. So first is the body temperature is greatly influenced by climate temperature and its characteristics. As climate temperature is constantly changing and temperature homeostasis is priority. The second way is by autonomic nervous system, which reacts robustly to thermal challenges by over orchestrating a complex array of neural responses below the level of conscious awareness. Okay, first when we exposed to a changing climate, our autonomic nervous system signals, or it maybe sensed it and then produce its response. The third is human behavioral temperature regulation. That means when if we have a trip to Munnar or any cold place, like we will always keep an additional cloth or sweater. Why? Because it's a type of behavioral temperature regulation. That is, we ourselves know that when we put the sweater into our body, then the temperature will be decrease to our body. So uh, this is the behavioral temperature regulation, which responds to thermal sensory input by seeking warmth or coolness, slowing down or stepping up, or discontinuing or increasing and exercise, and removing or adding clothing or equipment, countering its current environmental temperature. Simultaneously, it is also responsible for getting people into situations of cold or heat stress, some of which can threaten life or health. The temperature of body is almost entirely by nervous feedback mechanism, and almost all these operate through temperature regulating centers located in hypothalamus. For these mechanisms to operate, there must be also temperature detectors to determine when the body temperature becomes either too or too low. So this temperature regulating centers is located in our brain, or is between our our nervous system. Then the temperature dictators, which may be present in our skin, that were to exposure to the changing environment or changing temperature. The body's core internal temperature has a narrow range and typically ranges 97 to 99 Fahrenheit with tight regulation. When the body's ability to thermoregulate becomes disrupted, what can be happened? It may be overheating or being too cold, that is hypothermia or hypothermia respectively. Either state can have deleterious effects on the various body systems, most significantly reduced blood flow, leading to ischemia and multiple organ failure. So thermoregulation is having three main mechanisms. We have already talked it. Then we are going to discuss it in details. So the three mechanism first is consist of afferent sensing, then central control, and the last one is efferent responses. Okay, there are receptors for both heat and cold throughout the human body. Afferent sensing works through these receptors to determine if the body core temperature is too cold or too hot. The hypothalamus is the central controller of thermoregulation. There is also an efferent behavioral component that responds to fluctuations in the body temperature. For example, if a person is feeling too warm, the normal response is to remove an outer article of clothing. If a person is feeling too cold, they choose to wear more layers of clothing. Okay, so there are two types of afferent responses. One is autonomic or autonomic response by the nervous system, and the second one is behavioral response, that is removing clothes or adding sweater. The afferent responses also consist of autonomic automatic responses by the body to protect itself from extreme changes in temperature such as sweating, vasodilation, vasoconstrictions, and shivering. So when our body is too hot, there must be a lot of changing in our body. That is vasodilation of skin blood vessels, sweating, and decrease in heat production. Vasodilation means increasing the diameter of the blood vessels, so more blood can flow through it, and also more heat is released. When the temperature inside our body is too cold, the skin vasoconstriction throughout the body. That is the decreasing of diameter of blood vessels, so only small amount of blood will flow, and the release of heat will be less or little rather than hot conditions. Second mechanism is piloerection. Piloerection means hair standing in, like goosebumps, goosebumps. Then third is increasing thermogenesis. Thermogenesis means heat production. That's all. So temperature increasing mechanisms when the body is too hot is, first one is vasodilation of skin blood vessels. In almost all areas of the body, skin blood vessels become intensely dilated. This is caused by inhibition of sympathetic centers in posterior hypothalamus that causes vasoconstriction. Full vasodilation can increase the rate of heat transfer to the skin as much as eightfold. Sweating is the second process, that is, there is a sharp increase in the evaporative heat loss resulting from sweating when the body core temperature rises above the critical level, that is of 37 degrees Celsius. An additional 1 degree Celsius increase in body temperature causes enough sweating to remove 10 times the basal rate of body heat production. The third mechanism is decrease in heat production. That is, the mechanism that cause heat production, such as shivering, chemical thermogenesis, are strongly inhibited. Next is temperature regulating mechanism when the body is too cold. Okay, first one is skin vasoconstriction throughout the body. This is caused by stimulation of the posterior hypothalamus sympathetic centers. Piloerection is the second process where it means hair standing on end. Sympathetic stimulation causes the erector pili muscles attached to the hair follicles to contract, which brings hairs to an upright stance. This is not important in human beings. We've seen it in the animals. But in lower animals, upright projection of hair allows them to entrap a thick layer of insulator air next to skin. So transfer of heat to surroundings is greatly depressed. The polar bear is a good example. Increasing thermogenesis, that is heat production. Heat production by metabolic systems is increased by promoting shivering, sympathetic excitation of heat production, and thyroid secretion also. Here are two extra points. When cold fluids are ingested, the heat is released into the fluid and excreted out of the body as sweat or urine. The hypothalamus checks our current temperature and compares it with the normal temperature of about 37 degrees Celsius. So if the temperature regulation is not happened, then what will be happened to our body? So the first point is multiple organs and body systems are affected when the thermoregulation is impaired. The heart experiences increased work as it increases both heart rate and cardiac output. Circulatory system can experience intravascular volume depletion. The brain can experience ischemia and or other types of edema. The gastrointestinal tract is vulnerable to hemorrhage and infection as the intestinal mucosa becomes increasingly permeable. The lungs become impaired if sustained hyperventilation, hypopnea, and pulmonary vasodilation leads to ARDS. Acute renal failure is an effect of intravascular volume depletion and impaired circulation. Liver cells suffer because of the fever, ischemia, and cytokine increase in the intestinal tract. Various organs can become ischemic to form microthrombi or TIC. Electrolyte abnormalities likely as well as hyperglycemia, metabolic acidosis, and respiratory alkalosis. So there are too many conditions or too many effects when the thermoregulation is not happened. The two main effect is hypothermia and hyperthermia. Hypothermia is a disorder where body core temperature decreases below 35 degrees Celsius. It decelerates all physiologic roles include metabolic rate, mental awareness, nerve conduction, neuromuscular reaction times, and both the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. In hyperthermia, it is an elevated core temperature of 40.5 degrees Celsius. It is clinically cause sweating, flushing, tachycardia, fatigue, lightheadedness, headache, paraesthymia, muscle cramps, oliguria, nausea, agitation, hypotension, and confusion, delirium, seizures, and finally coma. Cold, cold hands, cold feet, even the tip of the nose is being cold reveal clues about circulation of and body temperature. Bundling it up with sweaters and layers when others are comfortable is another indicator that something may not be working properly. Impaired thyroid and adrenal function are the two most common endocrine causes of low body temperature. A number of other disorders are linked with low body temperatures such as Addison diseases, blood sugar imbalance, mitochondrial disorders, infectious, kidney failure, liver failure, asthma, and anemia. Hormonal imbalance with a low progesterone and or estrogen dominance, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and insomnia. So here is the temperature regulation by three main glands. The first one is brain, that is they having temperature regulating centers which controls or which affects the thermoregulation. The second one is the thyroid gland which having thyrotropin releasing hormone TSH and thyroxine. And the third one is adrenal gland which is seen above the kidney. They have producing hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine. So let's see what are these doing in thermoregulation and what's their function. Hypothalamus and temperature regulation. The anterior hypothalamic preoptic area has been found to contain large number of heat sensitive neurons as well as about one-third as many cold sensitive neurons. These neurons are believed to be function as temperature sensors for controlling body temperature. The heat sensitive neurons increase their firing rate to 2 to 10 fold in response to a 10 degrees Celsius increasing body temperature. The cold sensitive neurons by contrast increase their firing rate when the body temperature falls. When the preoptic area is heated, the skin all over the body is immediately breaks out in a profuse sweat, whereas the skin blood vessels over the entirely body become greatly dilated. This is an immediate reaction to cause the body temperature to lose heat, thereby helping to return the body temperature towards the normal level. In addition, any excess body heat production is inhibited. Therefore, it is clear that the hypothalamic preoptic area has the capacity to serve as thermostatic body temperature control center. The posterior hypothalamus integrates the central and peripheral temperature sensory signals. Even though many temperature sensory signals arise in peripheral receptors, these signals contribute to body temperature to control mainly through the hypothalamus. The area of hypothalamus that they stimulate is located bilaterally in the posterior hypothalamus, approximately at level of the mammillary bodies. The temperature sensory signals from the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area are also transmitted into this posterior hypothalamic area. Here the signals from the preoptic area and the signals from elsewhere in the body are combined in and integrated to control the heat producing and heat conserving reactions of the body. Hypothalamic stimulation of shivering. So when we shiver, it is controlled by hypothalamus. The preoptic and anterior hypothalamic nuclei of hypothalamus is controlling this shivering. Located in the dorsomedial portion of the posterior hypothalamus near the wall of third ventricle is an area called the primary motor center for shivering. This area is normally inhibited by signals from the heat center in the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area, but is excited by cold signals from the skin and spinal cord. This center becomes activated when the body temperature falls even a fraction of degree below the critical level of temperature. It is then transmits signals that cause shivering through bilateral tracts down the brainstem into lateral columns of the spinal cord and finally to the anterior motor neurons. These signals are non-rhythmical and do not cause actual muscle shaking. Instead, they increase the tone of skeletal muscle throughout the body by facilitating the activity of anterior motor neurons. When the tone rises above a certain level, shivering begins. This probably results from feedback oscillations of muscle spindle stretch reflex mechanism. During the maximum shivering, the body heat production can rise up to 5 to 4 to 5 times normal. So, adrenal gland and temperature regulation. How is adrenal gland is involved in thermoregulation? Sympathetic chemical excitation of heat production. An increase in either sympathetic stimulation or circulating non-epinephrine and epinephrine in the blood can cause an immediate increase in the rate of cellular metabolism. This effect is called chemical thermogenesis or non-shivering thermogenesis. It results at least partially from the ability of norepinephrine and epinephrine to uncouple oxidative phosphorylation, which means that excess foodstuffs are oxidized and thereby release energy in the form of heat but do not cause ATP to be formed. Adrenal fatigue and hormonal dysregulation from brain stress. Adrenal stress and adrenal fatigue and Addison disease all can impact body temperature regulation. Adrenal fatigue or distress can lead to imbalanced hormone levels, which including either low or high cortisols or low or high DHEA, depending on how the body has to be adapted to acute and chronic stress. In additional stress, the glands produce relatively normal levels of hormones but are under pressure and have an altered pattern of output. Adrenal function returns back to homeostasis when the stress is removed and the rest has occurred. Imbalance of these adrenal hormones can cause low body temperature and other stress related symptoms. A low level of serotonin and dopamine. They are the two hormones secreted by the adrenal glands. They also affect the body temperature regulation. Both neurotransmitters are required for thyroid hormone production. Chronic stress depletes serotonin and dopamine. Serotonin controls body heat production because it functions as a signaling molecule in fat tissues. Serotonin controls body heat production because it functions as a signaling molecules in fat tissue and affects the blood sugar regulation. Serotonin is needed by the hypothalamus and pituitary gland to signal TSH, that is thyroid stimulating hormone their production. Low serotonin level can lead to low TSH and low body temperature, but the thyroid gland is not the direct cause. Coenzyme or methylated forms B vitamins, magnesium, iron, and SAMs, trimethyl, triethylglycine, etc., are nutritionally required for serotonin production. Low dopamine levels in the brain can also cause low TSH production, which leads to low body temperature, poor thyroid function, and hypothyroidism. Adrenal fatigue is also linked with the low dopamine levels. So the next is thyroid gland and temperature regulation. Increased thyroxine output as a long-term cause of increased heat production. Cooling the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area also increases the production of neurosecretory hormones thyrotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus. This hormone is carried out by the way of hypothalamic portal veins to the anterior pituitary gland where it stimulates secretion of thyroid stimulating hormones. Thyroid stimulating hormone in turn stimulates increased in output of thyroxine by the thyroid gland. The increase in thyroxine activates uncoupling protein and increases the rate of cellular metabolism throughout the body, which is yet another mechanism of chemical thermogenesis. This increase in metabolism does not immediately but requires several weeks exposure to cold to make the thyroid gland hypertrophy and reach its new level of thyroxine secretion. Exposure to animals to extreme cold for several weeks can cause their thyroid glands to increase in size 20 to 40%. However, human beings seldom allow themselves to be exposed to the same degree of cold as that to which animals are often subjected. Therefore, we still do not know quantitatively how important the thyroid mechanism of adaptation to cold is in the human being. Isolated measurements have shown that military personnel residing for several months in the Arctic developed increasing metabolic rates. Some Inuit Eskimos also have been abnormally high basal metabolic rates. Furthermore, the continuous stimulatory effect of cold on the thyroid gland may explain the much higher incidence of toxic thyroid goiters in people who live in cold climates than in those in live in warm climates. Hypothyroidism is well known cause of low body temperature and intolerance. Appropriate medical and nutritional management is essential to minimize the impact. So that's all. Thank you.